there. Welcome to Humans of Authenticity, and thank you for choosing my podcast. My name is Lily, and I'll be your host. Humans of Authenticity will share many heartfelt conversations with my guests on their stories and how they embrace their authenticity in all forms. Authenticity will be a buzzword unless we pause and reflect on what it means for us, for individuals like you and me. Join me in these conversations. In each episode, my guests will choose a keyword from a selection of 12, which will be used as the theme of the conversation. These keywords change frequently, so you will only hear the same keyword once. Enjoy the episode today. Morning, Annie. Thank you so much for joining me on the episode today of Humans of Authenticity. Would you like to start the conversations with an introduction about yourself to our listeners first?
Sure. I'm Annie Storey. I am currently an executive director of the Illinois Section American Water Works Association here in Naperville, Illinois. I am a Midwest girl. I grew up in Nebraska, spent a few years in DC, but then have found really Chicago home. I moved here 3 times, so it is my calling to be here. I am one of the few in the association world that actually studied to be here. I knew in high school through some experiences that this is what I wanted to do with my life. I have a degree in public administration, and then I went and got a master's in child, youth, and family studies, AE, in 2016, I think. Yeah, I have just always enjoyed working with people, and I find that that's really the center of a lot of what we do. And I'm excited to be here with you today to share some of my leadership lessons and learn from you too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the achievement. I agree with you. The path to association as a career is very varied. I stepped into this industry through my volunteer work back in university as well. So I completely understand where you're coming from. And when we have such a strong connection with associations at an earlier stage of our career, it helps with setting intention and setting the foundations for our career development a lot clearer. I really appreciate that you share that.
Yeah.
Let's take some time to learn a bit more about yourself. Can you share 3 things that you love about yourself with us?
Ooh, 3 things that I love about myself. I love the people that are around me. I had roles early in my career where I traveled and I had teams of people. My mom always jokes I can go to about any city and find a friend. I think that that is kind of cool, right? That I've got a great network of people, and I know that that's not really myself, but I think that's a reflection of who I am and keeping those connections. I love change. If anybody knows me, has worked with me, that's probably a good and a bad thing. It depends on who you are. But I love that we can come up with creative ideas and we're nimble and we can try things. And I also love that I like to do things like this. I know a lot of people are scared to get up in front of an audience in any way, shape, or form, and I'm not. I think it's really fun to be able to do that and to draw things out from the audience. So I love that public speaking part.
Nice. Let's unpack your second
Okay.
part, that you love change.
Mm-hmm.
We know that change is scary. How do you navigate the disagreement when we introduce a new concept? There will be a lot of doubts and rejections.
Sure.
How do you perceive through all of that
Love
negative
that.
energy?
Yeah. I think when it's a big change, like we're moving our offices or we have a new staff structure or we're going to implement this new leadership pathway for our chapters, that requires a lot of stakeholders, right? And it's not just any idea. There has to be the data behind it. And I think I have always had that whole mantra, I guess, of like, you're going to get the same results unless you change. If there's an issue and it's a known issue and you're not doing anything about it, that's a problem in my book, right? So for me, I've always had that kind of backup to say, this is what we're hearing. This is what the data is telling us. I am not a data guru by any means, but I can grab it and figure it out and say, oh, yeah, right, here we go. And so that's helped. In my role as an executive director, what I've learned with my board of directors is a lot of our changes were very personal decisions. To change a conference from one place to another was really more about, oh my gosh, right? Them thinking like my experience is going to be different now. And so I have learned with some of those big things at our organization, it takes time because that's people's initial reaction is, how is this affecting me? And it takes them time to then flip that switch to, how is this better for our organization? So unless you are right, I mean, I would go, go, go. So now I know that, right? That I have to almost set the stage, whether it's data, whether it's just introducing the idea. Everyone needs time to think about it and take the personal piece out and think for the greater good and the mission. And then time and data help you move things forward. You will always have someone who says, not going to work, not going to work. I mean, I had someone come up to me once and say, do I really need to create this logo? This program isn't going to last long. The program lasted longer than me, right? I think that they finally sunsetted after maybe 8 to 10 years. So yes, sometimes you just have to buy into it. Not everybody's going to, and you have to be that believer and also share when it fails because not everything does work. Change or say, we're going to pivot. And I know that word got really overused a few years ago, but it's true. You start down a path and you say, yikes, nope, not what we thought. And have the courage to say, we have to make a change to our change to get to where we want to go. So that was probably a lot.
No, that's really cool. And I love how you provide me with really specific examples. I do want to unpack one more example in that
Sure.
stories that you just shared. Can you share with me a time when a change was introduced and was not implemented successfully?
Yeah, let me think about that. Right now, I work with wastewater operators, engineers, students, faculty, and we wanted to engage them more. We know that they don't all use computers all day. Some of my members, they check their email and then they're off for the day working on our water main lines or our plants or distribution centers or whatever it may be. And we thought maybe an app would help. Almost everybody's got a mobile phone. That would be a way for them to get connected to us. So we moved forward with getting a year-round app. We use it at our annual conference. It works great, but we just don't have the engagement or the staff capacity year-round. The app becomes our number one communication tool. So that is something that it was in our strategic plan to put forth. We did it, but really didn't have the understanding of how much time it takes to manage an app and to really promote it and get people engaged there. So it's something that we've kind of paused, I would say, from a staff perspective, because we've done a lot of other cool things. We're going to now come back to it and really try and test it out as we get closer to our annual conference, because then we'll be close to our agreement and then we can say, yep, let's go. Now we get it. Or we can say, we're just not an app group, right? I probably didn't know enough about my audience when we went this way, and we're going to find out more. I mean, our audience changes too, right? Based on as we get older and if people are used to it or not. So it's another tool. I think maybe that's how we should have thought about it. This is a tool. This isn't the one-stop shop of how we communicate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. So can you walk me through the process that you went through when you make the decisions to develop the app?
Yeah, so definitely was board directed, I would say, that we needed to do something. And a lot of it came around the idea of like a gamification, like let's have fun, right? Let's have easier access for people to sign up for our events. We host like 90 educational events a year. So we are a powerhouse of registrations. And when it comes to that for a small group, we vetted a few different tools. We chose one that worked best with our systems. And I still think we made the right decision. We just didn't really have people, some dedicated staff time for more than we gave it. It's not a one-stop shop, set it up like a website. I mean, a website's the same thing, right? You're constantly evolving pages and changing. And so I just didn't have that capacity. I've never hosted one, so I didn't know. Now I do, right? And so we're going to put some staff time into it because it's part of our strategic plan and it's a tool we have. And then we'll make the decision of whether it's it's something that our members gravitated towards, and or we stick with other traditional communication systems.
The last questions around these stories, having all of the data that you know now, if you make that decisions again, would you recommend to develop the app and go ahead with it?
Nope, I wouldn't have done it. No, now that I know that, and I mean, I still for our annual conference 100% because it works and it works well for our needs, but to do something year round, no. It's just not our population to
Okay.
do that. So,
All right, so I just want to drill down to the actual reason here. I picked up two. The first one is you don't have the staff capability for it. And the second bit is you mentioned earlier your audience, not an app user sort of group. So which was the more important reasons that led you to that decision not to recommend it anymore?
ooh, that one's hard. I think you could say, well, if you would have put the time in, your members would have come to it. And I might say, we put the time in and they didn't. So I don't know without us going through this next phase where we are really going to dedicate a lot of time and push right for that and see. But I did find we would do like challenges throughout the year, and I always had the same group. It wasn't like I was drawing in a new audience. And so I guess in a way that's great for that group, and I have to think about that, right? Not everyone's on Facebook, not everyone's on LinkedIn. And so we use a whole suite, right, of communication tools. So that would be an interesting data point to pull and see if my users, if they're following us in other ways. Because if that is their communication source, then we probably do have to keep it, right? Because we have to reach our members. So now you have me thinking. That's probably something we have to do. And if those people are following me on social media and everywhere else, then that's a reason to say, is this worth our staff time moving forward?
Thank you for sharing the stories. Membership communication is so fascinating because it's very personal. At the same time, different industry, different professions has different reactions to the same tones. So it's always a great learning experience for me to have these conversations in this space. And I think it's now a good time for us to move to our second agenda of the episode. This entire podcast series is built around the keyword of your choice. What keyword do you select for our discussion today?
I chose compassion.
Compassion is a very big word. In the context of authenticity, how do you interpret compassion?
If you look up the definition, compassion, I think, can be seen maybe a little negatively. It's like all about suffering together. And I read that and I thought, oh no, right? That's not at all what I want to be associated with. But then when you dig into it, compassion's really about people. And it is about giving people autonomy, making them feel belonged. It is about understanding their suffering in a way, right? And being able to build a system and a culture that supports what they're going through. And I think that's why I like compassionate leadership. And it's honestly not something that I ever thought of myself as until recently. I had a young woman who came to our organization and did awesome things and then found a great opportunity. And I'm always about go for that opportunity. And her note to me before she left, she said, "Thanks for showing me how to be a compassionate leader." And it kind of stopped me because I hadn't really thought of that word in that way. So then when you brought this up, I was like, oh, that would be really fun to dig into. And so maybe that's my theme. Maybe that's my word of the year is compassion, to just dig in. Empathy is a piece of it, but it's not all of it. And I think it just drives down to my central core, which is people and helping people.
Can you elaborate that a bit more? You mentioned that empathy is part of it, but not entirely compassion. Can you give me an example and or differentiate how do we show up with empathy comparing to how do we show up with compassion?
Yeah, so I did a little research to dig into it. And one of the sources I found talks a lot about empathy as a piece. There's an understanding piece, or at least being curious, right? I remember being young and had a work lunch, and some people were talking about mulch. And I was like, oh my gosh, is that what I'm going to be like when I'm 30? I'm going to talk about mulch. Yeah, once you're a homeowner, you do. And so I think that I probably was not a compassionate leader at that time, but just that understanding, right? We're all in different stages. There's being attentive, right? You can tell when somebody's got something else on their mind. So being inquisitive and asking, and then the helping, right? And so now I'm in a position as an executive director and with the staff where I can make some decisions that help them, right? I can be flexible if there's something going on. And I think that maybe that's why that has kind of emerged more. It's because now I have a little bit more of that role. But so it's four things: it's attending, it's understanding, it's empathizing, and it's helping. And all of those working together is what kind of builds compassionate leadership. And there's a piece of it too that I think when I was reading about it, when I think about my greatest mentors, there's the autonomy piece. And I try to really focus in on that with staff members. And even because I had a great manager who did the same for me, who said, here's the job, right? Here's the goals, get there. And I'm here to support you, right? And share ideas, but I'm not here to tell you, A, B, C, D the whole way. And so I try to leave some of that flexibility. And there's times where I'm like, well, that's not what I would have done. But guess what? We got to it in the same way and the goals were met and I learned something because of it. So I think that's a really big piece of that compassionate leader because we all look at things differently. And that's a piece of that understanding. And we don't always have all the answers, nor should we, right? We should always be learning from each other.
I love how you have understanding as part of that equation. Can you elaborate for me a little bit more? I find that with understanding, a lot of the time, if we have some sort of a shared perspective, shared core value, it's easier for us to understand each other's perspective. But what if our core values are so different? How are we able to bring that understanding into the team? On one hand, we want to diversify our team to bring in different
Yes.
perspective.
Right.
But on the other bipolar extreme, what if the perspective are vastly different and we cannot find that harmonious tone? How are we able to balance the two perspectives?
Well, but I think we always would find something in common, right? We are people. So we care. I think almost everyone cares about something, right? That's themselves. It is a plant. It is a dog. It is a turtle, whatever that is, right? And people. And so I think a lot of it is, that initial getting to know you. And that's hard for some people. Some people have a very clear line of, nope, this is work and family takes place. And I don't want to share that. So sometimes I think it is having a balance of sharing just enough so that they see too, like, oh, she's going through something, right? So whether it's my parents' health or buying a house, right? Like I'm probably going to be a little distracted when we're at closing day or whatever that is. I've worked with people that I just did not see eye to eye with ever, but we were still people, right? And we still had goals and vacations and things that we cared about and that we could sit around the lunch table and have a conversation about. So I do find it very valuable to have a diverse team because that is when you get the really great ideas and people look at problems differently and say, it's the aha moments of like, oh yeah, didn't think of it that way. Got it. So a lot of it is just how you build your team and how you interact with them in your weekly meetings, your one-on-ones. I try to just check in with my team. Why one-on-one isn't just about what's this week, what do we got, what do we got to train on? It is about how are you? Like what's going on? And if I know something's going on, that's our time to ask that. And it's a safe place, right? And that's really important is that psychological safety piece and people feeling like, oh, I can tell her she actually cares versus is she asking me because she's worried about my work? And that's not usually my conversation. My conversation is supporting that person so that they can get their work done and feel like they met their other obligations.
I like to build on that conversations a little bit more
Mhm.
from a leadership point of view. So, as a leader, how do you build compassion into your workplace culture?
A lot of it is that autonomy piece. That's always kind of been just my style is here's your tools and resources, and I'm one of those. in your toolbox or whatever you have. Here's the goal. And it's okay to make mistakes if you own up to them, right? You don't try to scurry past. And that just happened. Something happened and it was like, okay, well, how do we fix it? Okay, let's fix it. Not freaking out on you because I make mistakes too. I think part of it is making sure that people feel like they are part of the mission. One of the things I did with this organization is we looked at our job roles, and I had a great MBA HR candidate who helped me with this. We did some team interviews. We talked about culture. We looked at the job descriptions, and we were very much operational. And that sometimes works. But the board was looking for more strategy and moving us forward. So we had to take a look. We had to make some tough decisions, but we shifted our roles, created all new positions based on strategy. So my team knows exactly which of our strategic plan initiatives they are part of and they support, and they know that bigger mission. I think that helps because then you come in and that's a big goal for you. It's exciting, and we have to make it exciting and not burdensome. It wasn't like, here's your job. Oh, now we're going to add all this, which happens a lot. It was, no, your job is strategy. But to do that, we have to do some of the operations, right? Like the app has to work if that's our goal, right? Or, the registration system has to work if we want people at an event. And so we've just really shifted that. We also moved into a new office space, and it's all our colors, and it has a beautiful wall. Our values are the first thing you see. That's sometimes a good reminder, like brainstorming, and we're like, oh, what's a good word? And we just turn to that wall and we look, and we're like, oh, there's foster, there's stewardship, there's safe and sustainable and public health. And it's just a good reminder. Your environment plays a big role. I feel that way, right? When I walk into an office and it's cheery, right? Or it's, when we walk in and we've just gotten a shipment of books, you're like, oh, right? Those got to get put away. And I'm horrible at that, right? But that affects how everybody works if you've got to walk around stuff and, you want that kind of clean, open space. And so you've probably talked to somebody in interior design. There's probably, right? There is a whole organizational piece of that. As a leader, I'm making sure that my space is great. My team knows their roles and they know what the mission is. And we will say, is that deadline going to work? It's not. Okay, that's fine. Let's pick a new deadline if we have that flexibility. And sometimes we do. Most times we do. We can, because we've created those deadlines for ourselves. And we all know life happens. We can't control a lot of things.
That's a great demonstration of how you bring that compassion into a working environment, because we not only want to focus on KPI, of course we have to focus on KPI, but at the end of the day, like you say earlier, we are humans, life happens. We got to understand what's happening at the home front, because that impacts on how they show up daily with us. So I really appreciate that. There is an element in your story that I'd like to unpack again, autonomy. My observation is that there are some leaders who feel the responsibility to be involved in every single step of implementing a task, which means autonomy sometimes can be challenging for their team because their boss keep wanting to check at every single step of the way. As a leader, how do you cultivate the sense of autonomy, not only for yourself, but also for your team? So let's start with yourself first.
So in my current role, I report to the board. I have my job description. I have my annual goals. We meet monthly as an executive committee to check in on some of those things. So I feel supported. I know if something pops up, I'm going to call my chair. We're going to talk through it. That's what we do. I don't feel like I have to wait. I feel like we've built that trust. I've been there 3.5 years and we've done a lot of really great things. So I think there's just that trust factor in the relationship, no matter what the level is. They hired me because of my experience in association management, right? That is our role. And I always go back to that. Like, I'm not going to teach a doctor how to be a doctor. That's not what I studied. I studied this. And so I think there's that kind of credibility too with that. For myself, it is just improving. I'm going to hit those goals. If I'm not, we're going to talk about it. It is getting the job done. I try not to send those emails late at night, but that doesn't mean I didn't draft them, at 9 o'clock when that worked for my family and my time. Um, and I appreciate having that flexibility. I have two girls that are in grade school. And so, do I want to go to the Halloween party? Maybe. If that will work, I have to check, right? I know that it's not like I have to reach out and say, can I be gone from 10 to 12? And so there's kind of that piece of it. I don't want to say proven track record, but it is that trust. It is knowing what my goals are, and then I will figure it out. And I go back to our community a lot. That's one of the first things I do in the morning is I read through Collaborate. That's how I wake up. It's not like I want to see who's writing what. It's just like, what are the key topics? And if I'm not watching that and knowing what's happening on the world of associations, I'm going to be left behind too. So part of it is just like, okay, oh, maybe I should pay attention to this. And it's not like I do anything about it when I wake up, but when I get into work and I've got a break, I'll go back to it and read it a little bit more or check out the resource or sign up for the webinar, whatever that action item is. And I think that that's key, having that learning style of, right, constantly, what can we build from, what can we learn from, and who can we learn from? That's how we got to here for this piece of it. So to me, that's part of the autonomy too, is just being very self-aware and know what's happening in your industry, because someone doesn't have to check up on me and say, hey, have you checked out that latest, pick a trend, right? Yeah, I did. And it's not going to work for us. Or, that's a really great tool. We're going to have to budget for that next year, whatever it may be.
I check Collaborate daily as well. So
Mhm.
I'm glad that I find someone who does the same.
You're not alone at all. There's quite a few of us.
Let's move to the second part of that question. How do you cultivate the sense of autonomy among your team? Sometimes I'm still trying to find out at what point do I have to check with my boss? At what point I can make a decision myself?
Yeah.
Do you have any, I don't know, formula or any
Yeah,
process?
I don't. I've worked in associations as small as 6 people right now to as large as 500. And that is always a hard question to know. Where's the line of decision making? I had moved into a role and I went to the executive director and I said, okay, what do you think? And he said, no, I hired you to make that decision. And I said, you did? And he said, yes, right? That's your role. And I said, oh, I hadn't been in a place yet where that was okay. I was used to levels of it going to, okay, now the director to the VPs to the executive director or CEO. And so a part of that is culture. And part of this is just having that conversation to say, are you good with me making decisions? If you're the manager, you got to tell them that, to say, you do have a budget of X, right? So let's think about what that is and let me help. I love to brainstorm on things like that, right? You can't go purchase something without me, but you can bring me what you think you should use that budget for. And then we'll make that happen. So for me, it is just knowing that. And I think that's a good piece of when you hire someone. So I have a recent hire, and hopefully in our orientation is a month long. It is not a week or a couple meetings. I try to teach as things come up, because we all know you learn something day one, and if it does not apply to you for 30 to 90 days, you're going to have to go back to it anyway. It's awesome when I see them taking that ownership and running with it without being like, oh, do I have to, like, there's a system in place and there's training in place and they're following that. And that takes some internal operations and some internal time to build. But I think the decision making piece is the conversation that has to happen, because nobody likes to get their hand slapped. Also, the other piece is you don't want to be seen as someone who can't make a decision. So I always, no matter what, I try to have a solution if I have a problem, and to say, I need your advice. This is what I'm thinking. What am I not seeing? And I think once you kind of build that and your parameters, you'll gain that confidence to be like, yes, that was right. Right now, I'm kind of the final decision maker when it comes to operations. I've got my board to support me, and I've had to call them in on a few things where I'm like, oh, I'm just not real sure, though it was my decision. And so I think sometimes having that peer group or someone else. It doesn't even have to be within your organization. Hopefully everybody has that person. I've got mine where I call, we know our schedules, we can call me like, what do you think? They're not in this industry, but they are a team leader. And a lot of that is the same. It doesn't matter association versus for-profit versus healthcare. People are people.
I love how you describe your thought process and just make it relate back to that theme of compassions.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm learning from your story is that not only the leaders need to build in that compassion safety net for the team, but also as a team members, there are ways for us to be compassionate, more understanding, and show that respect to our leaders, to give them that data point that you mentioned earlier so they can help us with that decision-making process. Thank you for sharing that stories. We are getting to the end of our second item in this podcast. Before we move into the last part of our episode, is there anything else you'd like to highlight or any other stories you'd like to share about compassion or authenticity?
If you're not feeling like you're being heard, or you're not feeling like you can be your authentic self, or you've got someone, I want people to know there's a network, right? There's a lot of great organizations out there. So I don't want people to feel like they're siloed, because you don't have to be, you shouldn't be, and reach out. And like I just shared, I've got my person not in the industry at all, but then I've got really great people in the industry too. And that wasn't overnight. That takes time, right? Find someone, connect, go to a local conference where you're going to find those other people to commiserate with. Compassion is sometimes suffering, right? That's what that word means. And sometimes it is finding someone who's having a similar issue and helping each other through that. So that would be my last thing, is if you're feeling this isn't working, find someone to just have a conversation with that you feel like you can trust in or out of your organization, and be compassionate for each other and help people work through.
When you say be compassionate for each other, can you describe how that looked like, or do you have an example to highlight that?
Yeah, I mean, I've grown with ASAE. I've been on various councils, have gotten some really great friends from that. We have a text message thread, and we might not hear from each other for months. And then, if people are going through something, it's like, hey, everything from like, do you have a tool for X to this is happening, I don't know what to do. And we all jump in. I mean, it isn't like crickets, we are like, we're here to support you because we love you. You're our friend. And so that's how I think of it. I know people I can call. I know people I can connect with. When I took the executive director role, I called that executive director who told me, that's why I hired you, to make that decision. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about this, but I gut checking. And he said to me, one, look at the financials. Don't take over for an organization that doesn't have their financials in check. Okay, good sound advice. But then he said, it is a very lonely job. And you have to know that, right? Your board is not your friends. Your members are not your friends. Your staff are not your friends. You can't tell a lot of people a lot of things. And you have to find that group outside of your organization. And so I'm very thankful that I have multiple groups, I would say, based on my association career, based on being really involved with ASAE and Association Forum and Kansas City Society, all those groups. So important, because as you move up, you need each other for everything from what are you using for voicemail drops to crisis, and I need some support.
Thank you for that. We talked about your stories in the past. Now I'd like to shift gears for us to look into the next 12 months. What's next for you in the coming 12 months?
Oh, I don't know. It's so fun. So I am mid-career, and I think that I have to keep reminding myself of that. Like, you don't have to like rush to the next thing, right? I'm at a really great place. I had a goal of being an executive director before I was 40. I was 39 when I started. So I don't know what that next piece is, except to stay involved. There's some organizational goals for sure. We have gone through massive change. And so now we have to see if that's going to work, and if we have to make some changes to that. I've got a great team on board. So, what do they want to learn and grow about? We're all new, but now we've been there enough time that it's like, okay, pick what you got to learn more about and let me support you. I'm involved with a small staff association council. So, how can we support each other in that role? That will be a good focus of mine for the next 2.5 years. I don't have anything that's like bucket list. I have one more state to go to that I'm hoping I get to before I'm 45. So I can get that off my list. And that would have been nice to have done before this decade. But hey, that's all right. Life happens, right? And so you shift and you make a new deadline. And it's Alaska, by the way. So it's not like an easy one to get to, but I'm going to get there and see those northern lights. I think a lot of it is I have a hard time just kind of being, right? I am very much a go, 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 go. And I think career-wise, where I'm at, I need to we got to see how this is going to work. Did those systems make sense? And then let's reevaluate and keep it going.
What I love about how you describe your coming months and your plans is that even though I hear that you have set goals in mind,
Mhm.
at the same time, you give yourself some paddling to fall back, and you're willing to renegotiate those set goal and timeline. And what I'm hearing from that is a lot of compassion for yourself and allow yourself the time and the space that you mentioned so that you can make things happen for yourself. At the same time, acknowledging that different factors, different elements of life can get into the way and you allowed it to happen. Because if we don't have that allowance and paddling, it doesn't feel right emotionally. Right. It can make us feel uncomfortable because we haven't achieved that. I remember in the past, the younger and confused me, we had a goal, we want to make that happen, but because it didn't happen, I become harder on myself, and that become an itch in my gut that I cannot scratch. So it took me a long while to process that, but I love in your stories how you share that you allow yourself to be flexible around your goals, even though it is a goal that you wanted to achieve.
I really want to paint my cabinets, and I bought the paint a year ago, and my husband's like, why haven't you done that? So I'm like, oh, I have to find the time. So, it's not an excuse, right? I think that there's a difference there of like, oh, this happened, so I can't do it. And maybe the cabinets are because I know it's going to be a lot of work. But I think there is a difference of that allowance. I like how you say that versus it being just like, well, I can't go to Alaska. I don't, right? It's just never going to work. It's too much time, right? Like that's an excuse. But I think making sure that you're not losing sight of it and it's there and it's going to happen. Right.
Priority change, it happens.
Yeah.
So thinking about that coming 12 months, my question is, how does compassion fit into that 12 months goal that you just described?
Oh, that's tough. There's just always something, right? There's a new stage of life. For me, my parents are not in great health and they haven't been for a few years. That's a lot of stress. And for anybody who's going through that, let's talk, right? Let's be compassionate and suffer together because it is a lot. And if you're not going through that yet, call me when you are because it is a lot. I've learned a lot through this. When there's a crisis, it is a panic. It is, how are we going to do this? And you're so stressed. And then it's like, okay, now we're solid for a little bit. And then it happens again. Right. And so, the same conversation's been happening for 3 years at a family level of like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And you get kind of tired of it. And it's almost like the boy that cried wolf, right? Because then you're just like, I don't know. And you kind of disassociate with it and try to not. And then you're not really prepared, I think, for that next stage. So part of me, I guess, and that compassionate piece for myself is making sure I'm giving the people around me who need the support, the same level of support that they needed 3 years ago, even though I'm tired of it, right? Because that's not fair to them that I got tired of it. So, but it's also giving myself, if I need to go drink some wine and I do not talk to them for 24 hours or whatever it may be, that's okay too, right? Because I need that break. So I don't know. I hate the word balance. When we talk about our lives, someone used the term alignment. And I was like, oh, maybe I can get on board with that a little bit more. But I think it is just where I'm at. It's just that grace, right? It's that allowance but not losing sight of what really means the most to you.
Thank you for sharing that. And I feel that I want to give you a big hug.
Oh,
I'll do
well,
that
right back
next
at
time we
you.
see each other. This is really the end of the episode. Thank you so much for sharing your story and spending the time with me. I learned a lot from the conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
I learned a lot too. Great questions.
Thank
Make me
you.
think. I love it.
That's it for today's episode. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to hear your take on the chosen keyword. Have a lovely time, and thank you again for spending time with Humans of Authenticity. Until next time.